أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه تبارك وتعالى في محكم كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فإذا سويته ونفخت فيه من روحي فقعوا له ساجدين. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. The theme of our discussion is self-awareness and self-understanding. And so far we have been discussing the first subject, which is the subject of freedom. And we said that freedom can be divided into three types. There is freedom of the body, freedom of the mind, and freedom of the soul or of the spirit. We have already discussed in brief about freedom of the body and freedom of the mind. And tonight, insha'Allah, we will discuss about freedom of the soul. The ayah that I have recited has been mentioned twice in the Holy Quran. Once in Surah Al-Hijr, verse number 29. And the very same ayah again in Surah Al-Sad, verse number 72. Where Allah Azza wa Jal says, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. O my angels, when I finish creating this human being and I blow into him my spirit, my ruh, then all of you should go into sajda in front of this human being. As far as the existence of ruh is concerned, as far as the existence of a spirit is concerned, a soul, Islam is very clear. There is no doubt that human beings have been made up of two aspects. The first is their body and the second is their soul. We have numerous narrations. Some narrations tell us that after Allah Azza wa Jal created the body of Adam, the body remained lifeless for 40 years, after which Allah Azza wa Jal put his ruh inside the body of Adam. And we have similar narrations that talk about how human beings have a soul. However, the scholars who come from traditions other than the faith-based traditions doubt in the existence of a soul. You find those scientists and those philosophers who do not believe in God trying to grapple with the question of an entity that can neither be measured, nor can you experiment on it in the laboratory, nor can you define it, nor do you know what it is, and therefore they take the easy way out and deny the existence of the soul. So for example, you have a philosopher like René Descartes. René Descartes is famous for his dualism, known as the Cartesian dualism. He says human beings are made up of two things, the mind and the body. He does not accept the soul. He says the mind and the body. Because when you talk of the mind, it is easier to understand. But the soul is something that is beyond our comprehension. Yet there are some classical philosophers like Aristotle, whom they call in Arabic Aristoteles. Aristotle used to believe that human beings have three souls. The nutritive soul, which they share with the plants and the animals, the soul that helps them to grow. The perceptive soul, which they share with animals, and the rational soul, which is only for human beings. So these are the different views with regards to the soul. Now those scholars who do not accept the existence of the soul have to grapple with certain issues and certain problems. One of the questions that they find difficult to answer is the question of human identity. Today, when somebody asks you, who are you? If you try to tell them, I am a man, I have black hair, I am about 6 feet tall, I am this many years old, they will say you are describing your body. I want to know who you are. Tell me about your real identity. Is your identity your body, or is it something other than your body? So the philosophers have to grapple with this question. And the main problem that arises is the question of diachronic identity, which is a special kind of identity, the identity over time. So for example, I know who I am. But if I go to sleep at night and I wake up the next day, how do I know it is still the same me and not another person? Diachronic identity. And why is this important? This is important because, let us say a young man of 22 years commits a crime. Let us say he murders someone. And they don't catch this man for 30 years. Now he is 52 years old and they catch him. Is this the same man who committed the murder or a different person? His body has changed, his hair has become gray, he probably doesn't even remember what he did. Is he the same individual or not? So over time, what is constant? What is the thing that maintains the identity? For us it is very easy, we say our souls. But for those who don't accept the soul, they have a problem. In Islamic theology, we have a similar question which is known as Shubhatu al-Akil wal-Ma'kul. Shubhatu al-Akil wal-Ma'kul is a very interesting question. I will just pose the question to you so that you can think about it. I will not give you the answer. The question is like this. Human beings, when they die, they are buried in the ground. After many years, their body decays and becomes part of the earth. A person comes and plants a tree on top of their grave. The tree sucks in the nutrients from that earth. The same atoms and molecules that were part of the human being now become part of that tree. The fruit that comes out of the tree has the same molecules. An animal comes and eats that fruit. Now the same atoms and molecules that were part of the human being that became part of the tree are now part of that animal. Another human being takes that animal, slaughters the animal and eats the animal. So the parts of that human being, the atoms and molecules that came into the tree, that came into the fruit, that came into that animal are now part of another human being. On the day of judgment, Allah Azza wa Jal will raise all the human beings. All your bodies will come back to the way they were. How can this happen? How can it happen that He raises everyone with their bodies where maybe someone else is in me? Their atoms are in me. And therefore, if Allah takes back their atoms, then I will be naqis, I will be incomplete. Do you understand the shubha? Do you understand the doubt that is raised? Now you can think about this doubt. This is something similar to the question of diachronic identity. So the scholars now who don't believe in the soul, they had to come up with a solution. So one of the philosophers by the name of John Locke, very famous philosopher, he says, I know the answer. I know that thing which links a person to their identity of the past, such that the same person you are today, you know, is the same person who was when he was 10 years old, when he was 5 years old, when he was 15, you are the same person. And what is that link? He says the link is memory. You remember your past, therefore you know that you are the same person. If somebody asks you which school did you go to, which primary school, which high school, you can tell them. So you know that that 10-year-old boy was you, and now you are an old man. But we tell John Locke, hold on a minute. If you are saying that diachronic identity is based on memory, then what about people who lose their memory? There's a very interesting book written by a man known as Scott Bolzan. The title of the book is My Life Deleted. In that book, Scott Bolzan writes how in the year 2008 he had an accident, and because of that accident he developed severe retrograde amnesia, such that he did not know his own name. He did not know who his children were. He did not know his wife. He did not remember anything. Now you tell me, if this happens, are you trying to tell me that the man he was yesterday was a different man and the man he is today is a different man? And therefore, this question of diachronic identity can only be answered if we acknowledge the presence of a soul, that human beings have a soul. Any other way of trying to solve this problem will not work. That is the first question. The second question we deal with before entering into our main subject, which is freedom of the soul, is what is the relationship between the body and the soul? Is there a relationship or not? Are they two distinct aspects of a human being, or are they connected? In Islam, we are told that anything we do with our bodies imprints on our soul. The actions we perform with our bodies permanently gets fixed onto our soul. It is through the process of tawbah at times that we are able to remove that influence, but otherwise our bodily actions affect our souls. And that is why when we look at the riwayat, we find a riwayah that says, Man akala luqmata haramin لم تقبل له صلاة 40 ليلة ولم تستجب له دعوة 40 صباحا. Whoever eats a morsel of haram, one morsel, his prayers are not accepted for 40 nights, and his dua is not accepted for 40 days. There is a direct link between the soul and the body. Now let us turn to our subject, which is freedom of the soul. What do you mean when you say freedom of the soul? When we say freedom of the soul, in order to understand the meaning, we turn to the riwayat and to the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and we find in the hadith of Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, an explanation about freedom of the soul. He says, Al-Hurriya munazzahatun min al-ghilli wal-makr. Freedom is being away from grudges, rancor, and guile, cunningness. From this hadith and from many similar hadith, we find that our definition, therefore, for freedom of the soul is freedom from spiritual diseases, freedom from spiritual maladies. Like what? Like grudges, like greed, like jealousy, and all these things. Unfortunately, human beings tend to think only about their physical well-being, tend to think only about their physical freedom. They don't think about their spiritual freedom. Sometimes your spirit needs something different from what your body needs. Rumi has an interesting anecdote in his Mathnawi about Majnoon. All of you know Majnoon, right? Layla and Majnoon. He says, Majnoon one day wanted to go and meet Layla. And so he took his camel. He had a she camel. And that she camel had a baby. But because Majnoon wanted to reach Layla very quickly, he kept the baby tied at home. And he went with the she camel towards Layla. On the way, whenever Majnoon became absent-minded and he left the reins of his camel, because she was worried about her baby, would always turn back towards the home. Again he realized, again he pulled the camel towards Layla. After a little while, again the camel would turn towards home. Until in the end the camel collapsed. And then Rumi says, after mentioning this anecdote, he says that how many of us don't think about our souls, we think only about our body. We don't consider what we need for our souls. This is very important. This is something that we need to understand. Some of the Muslims think that in order to train your soul, in fact, not only Muslims. We find even in other religious traditions like the Hindus and the Buddhists, for example, they think that in order to achieve that spiritual freedom, we need to punish our bodies. We need to face physical hardships and then we become free. Our souls become free, our spirits become free. This is not necessarily true. This is not what Islam preaches. Islam does not preach that you torture yourself in order to free your spirit. In the 18th century, there was a Persian Shah by the name of Nadir Shah. And when Shaheed Mutahhari Ridwanullah alayhi mentions this point about not having to torture your bodies to achieve freedom of the spirit, he says, look at Nadir Shah, what a tyrant he was. He used to pull out the eyes from the sockets of men. He used to build minarets using the skulls of human beings whom he had killed. Yet this same Nadir Shah would torture himself so much, he would put his body under so much hardship, that when he used to go for his conquests, when he used to go to capture certain villages and towns with his armies, Sometimes for 10 days he would not take out his shoes, his boots. That is how much he put himself under stress and under strain physically. And he says it was a cold winter night when the same Nadir Shah went and passed by an inn. And he knocks on the door and the innkeeper opens and he says, "What food do you have?" The innkeeper serves the food. "Please feed my horse." The innkeeper feeds the horse. And in the end, after taking 1 hour rest, Nadir Shah gives the innkeeper some gold coins and tells him, "After a little while you will find a group of soldiers coming. Tell them that Nadir Shah has said that you should follow him in this direction." When the innkeeper heard that this was Nadir Shah, he started trembling and he dropped the gold coins. This was Nadir Shah. That means that even in the worst of weathers, a cold winter night, he did not afford himself and his army any rest. But does that mean that because he put himself under so much physical strain and hardship that he was spiritually free? No. And therefore, it is not necessary that in order to achieve this spiritual freedom, you need to put yourself in physical hardship. That is not the case. Now, human beings in their daily lives, they are so much engrossed with the material world. They are so much engrossed with this dunya. They hardly have time to think about the akhirah. They hardly have time to think about their souls. And when it is too late and they are in the grave, then they can only regret. There is nothing they can do once they are inside the qabr. But from time to time, Allah Azza wa Jal gives us certain flashes. There will be moments in your life when you will recall that you are here in this dunya only as a temporary guest. You are only on transit. These moments will come to you from time to time. And if we take advantage of these flashes, we can hold on to them and change our lives while we still have the opportunity. These ahwal, as they are known, these flashes that come to us, have been described beautifully by one of the well-known philosophers by the name of Shihabuddin Suhrawardi. In order to explain us what these flashes are, he has given an analogy, an example. He says that there was a king who had a beautiful garden with so many birds. And one day the king commanded his servants to take one of the peacocks. He was performing an experiment. He took one of his peacocks and he told his servants to put a leather sack on the eyes of the peacock, such that the peacock could not see its own beauty. And then to put that peacock in a basket, such that the peacock is in darkness and it cannot move around freely, leaving a small hole in the basket just sufficient for food so it can feed the peacock. So Suhrawardi says, after many years, that peacock forgot its reality. That peacock forgot how beautiful it was. That peacock forgot about that beautiful garden where it lived and the other beautiful birds that were around it. All it knew was darkness. From time to time, however, the peacock would hear the sound of other birds and it would have a yearning to know what is beyond its place, what is beyond its basket. From time to time, there would be this kind of external sound that would make the peacock aware that there is something more than what it has around it. And then Suhrawardi says that is the condition of human beings. It is as if we are blind. We are blind in this world. We do not see our reality. And when we die, and that is the time when we will wake up, فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. That is when your eyes will see the reality. And that is how he describes the situation of human beings. However, there are people who are lucky. They are lucky that they hold on to these flashes and they change their lives. In an instant, you find a person who has been a sinner becomes one of the awliya Allah. And this, we have many examples of this. The doors of rahmah are open for us. We can change at any time. The example of Bishr al-Hafi, all of you know Bishr al-Hafi. Bishr, the barefooted one. Al-Hafi means the barefooted one. How did he become barefooted? He was a person who loved the dunya. He was a person who loved the pleasures of this world. He was not a religious man. He was not one to think about the akhirah. He was not one to think about his soul and the freedom of his soul. No. He was deeply engrossed in this world. What happened? There are two versions of what happened. Our version of what happened is that one day, our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, goes and passes by the house of Bishr al-Hafi, and he hears the sounds of music and dancing coming from the house of Bishr al-Hafi. At that very moment, the slave girl comes out to throw some garbage, and the Imam alayhi salam asks her, the owner of this house, is he a free man or a slave? And she says, he's a free man, of course. The Imam replies, yes, he must be a free man, because if he was the slave of Allah, he would not do what he is doing. When the slave girl goes back into the house, Bishr asks her, why are you late? What delayed you? So she says, I met a man, and the man asked me about the owner of this house. He asked me about you, and he asked whether you are a free man or a slave. And I said that you are a free man, and he said, yes, indeed, he must be a free man, because if he was the slave of Allah, he would not do what he is doing. That one sentence was sufficient to change Bishr, such that he ran out of his house barefooted. And he comes to the Imam and he says, oh Imam, is there any way that I can repent? And the Imam says, yes, the doors of repentance are open. And Bishr was so regretful for what he had done that from that day onwards, he never wore any footwear, any sandals or any shoes. He was barefooted. And it is said that out of respect for Bishr, the animals of Baghdad would not drop their dung on the streets of Baghdad, because they knew that Bishr will be walking by barefooted. And one day, when someone sees dung on the streets of Baghdad, he says, Bishr must have passed away. And when they find out, indeed, Bishr had passed away from this world. This is the Shia version of the conversion of Bishr. The freedom of Bishr from the slavery of worldly desires. There is a Sunni version also, because Bishr is someone who is highly regarded by both the Shias and the Sunnis. Of course, the Sunnis will not mention the seventh Imam alayhi salam. So their version of how Bishr became Bishr al-Hafi is that one day Bishr was walking and he saw on a paper the name of Allah Azza wa Jal, and he picked up that paper from the ground and he kissed it and he put it in a respectful place. And because of that action, Allah Azza wa Jal gave him that ability that he realized his faults, and from then on he became Bishr al-Hafi. So we know therefore that freedom of the spirit, freedom of the soul means freedom from maladies, freedom from sicknesses. Our first Imam, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, has a beautiful hadith in which he says, "Ad-dunya daru mamar, la daru maqar. وَالنَّاسُ فِيهِ رَجُلَانِ رَجُلٌ بَاعَ نَفْسَهُ فَأَوْبَقَهَا وَرَجُلٌ ابْتَاعَ نَفْسَهُ فَأَعْتَقَهَا." The Imam says that this world is a transient place. It's a transitory world. We are here temporarily and then we will leave. And the people of this world are divided into two categories. The first are those who sell their souls, thereby destroying themselves. And the second type are those who buy their souls, thereby freeing themselves. We have to decide which camp we want to be in. Now, when we talk of maladies of the soul, we can list numerous maladies of the soul, numerous diseases of the soul, and we don't want to go into so many of them. I just want to touch on one disease of the soul that many of us are plagued by, and that is the disease of greed. In Hadith al-Qudsi, Allah Azza wa Jal says that if the human being, if Bani Adam had a mountain of gold, he would still want a second mountain. Human beings are greedy creatures, and greed is one of the diseases of the soul. It is one of those things that shackles us, that shackles our spirit, that makes us slaves to this world. You cannot be a person who is truly free if you have greed for this world. Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasi Khalifa, heard that there was still at his time one companion of the Prophet who was still alive. You know, in Islamic history, we have certain individuals who are known as Mu'ammareen. The Mu'ammareen are those people who lived very long. They had long umr, long life. So Harun al-Rashid heard that there is still one old man, more than 130 years old, who was there and he was alive at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. So Harun wanted to meet him. So he sends his people to bring that old Sahabi to come and see him. And when that old frail man comes to the court of Harun, being carried by the servants, Harun speaks to him and he says, "Were you there at the time of the Prophet?" He says, "Yes." "Did you hear any of the ahadith of the Prophet?" He said, "Yes." "Can you please tell me one hadith that you heard directly from the Holy Prophet?" The old man says, "قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يشيب ابن آدم وتشب فيه خصلتان الطمع وطول الأمل. The Holy Prophet has said that a human being becomes old, but as he grows old, two qualities become young in him: greed and lengthy aspirations, long hopes. So Harun was happy to have heard the hadith, and as was the case with most of the people who had pleased him, he gave the old man a pouch full of gold coins. As the old man was being carried away, he saw that he was whispering something. So Harun said, "Bring him back. I want to know what was he whispering, what was he saying." Harun asks him, "I heard you whispering." He said, "Yes, I just wanted to know that this stipend that you have given me, this stipend, this gold coins, is it only for this year, or will you be giving me this every year?" So Harun starts laughing and he says, "Indeed, the Holy Prophet was true when he said this. Sadaqa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi." Because such an old man, but he still had hopes that he would live so many more years and would keep getting money from Harun for so many more years. This is the greed that is there. But does it mean that we cannot free ourselves from these shackles? No. We can. We can do it, and it has been done. Outside the Holy Prophet's mosque, there were a group of people who used to live there. They were known as the Ashab as-Suffa. Made up of individuals who were poor, made up of individuals who loved Rasulullah and wanted to see him all the time. So they lived there outside the Prophet's mosque. One time the Prophet goes to visit them and he meets one of them. And that person tells him, "Ya Rasulullah, عزفت نفسي عن الدنيا فاستوى عندي ذهبها وحجرها." O Prophet of Allah, my heart and my soul has turned away from this world, such that in my eyes now the gold of this world is equivalent to the stones of this world. I see no difference. What was the response of the Prophet? The Prophet tells him, "Idhan sirta hurra." Indeed, now you are a free man. Indeed, now you are a free man. And therefore we realize that it is possible for us to free ourselves from the shackles of love of this world, from the diseases of the soul, so that when we are asked, "Are you free?" we can say, "Yes, we are truly free." Otherwise, this physical freedom is just an illusion if we are shackled. If our minds are shackled, if our hearts are shackled, if our souls are shackled, then we are not truly free. Let us pray to Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us the true and complete freedom, such that we are truly free in this world, so that when we meet Allah on the Day of Judgment, then we will be counted amongst the Salihin. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.